Okay, class, welcome to this week's lecture on sport communication. As stated last week, sport communication is essentially an extension of sport marketing, but also stands on its own. We'll talk about how that is so over the next 15 minutes or so. So, as mentioned before, the learning outcomes are your compass in navigating the learning outcomes associated with this course. As you can see here, in class on Wednesday, we will develop press releases for an assigned organization and event. So I'm going to essentially assign groups various events, and you'll get practice with developing a press release, which is an integral part of sport communication. So let's begin, as always, by defining the primary concept. Sport communication, and I'm going to read here, you can read along with me, is a process by which people in sport or in a sport setting or through a sport endeavor share symbols as they create meaning through interaction. So let's dig a little bit deeper into that. Sport communication comes in many shapes and sizes, so to speak. So let's examine the basic structure. So in order to understand the sport communication model, we must first understand the basic typology associated with communication studies and the basic model for communication. We have the sender and we have the receiver. The sender encodes, in other words, crafts or develops a message, and then sends that message through a specific channel or set of channels. If the message is received through all of the noise, in other words, the distractions, the barriers, etc., the receiver then decodes, in other words, translates that message and provides feedback. Now, let's use a sport example. But understand this basic model is not sport specific and applies to communication in general. But for the sake of clarity and context, we'll go with a sport example. The sender-receiver dynamic may be interpersonal. It could be, for example, the general manager of the Golden State Warriors communicating to her public relations director that she wants a photo shoot with the team helping kids read. The channel could be verbal dialogue one-on-one or in a boardroom, a company memo, an email, a text, hieroglyphics, which is how we communicated back in the good old days of the 1990s, or yes, even fax. Let's say it's an email, obviously one of the more standard communication channels in today's workplace. There can be a tendency for misinterpretation with email. So in decoding that message, the PR director may think to himself, gosh, she's ticked with me and thinks I'm not doing my job. The PR director may then reply with several forwarded emails where he tried to organize photo shoots and the players resisted due to time conflicts. This is an example of feedback. It might be then decoded by the GM and interpreted as unwarranted feedback or an excuse, and so on and so on. This is the complex interaction associated with human communication. And as you get into a professional position, you'll learn more and more about how this works. This example that I gave you was interpersonal, but sport communication obviously goes much wider and deeper than interpersonal. So now let's look at the effect communication has on the parties involved in an interaction. There are numerous theories of mass media effects. Let's examine those theories relative to the case of Ben Roethlisberger, the embattled but wildly successful quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, to give those who are unfamiliar with Big Ben's story, the background, Ben was suspended for 4 games to start the 2010 NFL season due to being accused but not charged or convicted of sexual assault. It was the second such charge levied against him, as a woman the previous year alleged that Ben raped her while he was staying at the resort where she was employed in management. That allegation also did not result in a charge or conviction. After the first incident, the prevailing sentiment espoused by the mass media and Big Ben and the Steelers' PR was that the woman was greedy in seeking only a civil suit rather than a criminal conviction. The second incident occurred in a nightclub, and heavy drinking was involved. The allegation was that one of Ben's entourage ushered a 20-something female who had been partying with the group back to where Ben was waiting in the women's restroom. She alleged that he sexually assaulted her. Conversely, the second incident resulted in a firestorm of negative publicity, where the mass media all but convicted Ben of at the least poor judgment and at the worst full-on rape. Since he was not charged with sexual assault by the authorities, the sentiment became that he was guilty of extremely poor judgment and was out of control from a personal standpoint. The NFL commissioner agreed and suspended him 4 games to start the 2010 season for conduct detrimental to the league. So, you have the background. Now, the mass media messages were essentially decoded by me and then subsequently encoded to present to you via this channel of an online lecture. So let's look at the theories of mass media effects in the context of this case. First, uses and gratification. This theory holds that we embrace or reject messages based on our psychological dispositions and needs. My psychological disposition is one where a feeling of utter disdain is elicited in cases involving sexual assault. I cannot fathom it, so my initial reaction was one of disgust and a desire to never again cheer for my Steelers, as long as Ben Roethlisberger remained the quarterback. As time passed, the mass media and Steelers PR fed images of a wholly new Big Ben, one who, while falsely accused, took responsibility for his poor judgment. It became useful for me to reject those prior feelings and embrace new ones in order to justify continued support for my football team with Big Ben at the helm. Now, the next theory, the agenda-setting theory, holds that the mass media could never have influenced me fully in whether to believe the allegations or not. That form of, quote, mind control, if you will, is above even their power, but they can set the agenda. They provided daily updates on the case, and it did set the agenda in keeping it fresh in my mind and the minds of all who tuned in to the message. Now, with the innovation theory, I like to think of this as the breaking news segment. Have you ever heard the saying, as new developments arise in the case, we will keep you informed? Almost daily with this story, there were new developments to keep us riveted. You could read ongoing reports as it scrolled through. You guys probably most recently the Monte Teo story, constant scrolls on the ESPN feed underneath, keeping us updated on new developments in the story. Now, as new information arose, back to the Big Ben story, I remember talking with others about the case, which is where the theory diffusion of information comes in. We process what we hear and we go and share it with others. This is essentially the water cooler theory. And then finally, we come to the Charles Barkley segment of the theories with modeling and cultivation. So with the Hall of Fame basketball player Charles Barkley famously quipped, "I am not a role model." Yet, like it or not, and one of the reasons why the Big Ben story and so many like it are so painful to many of us associated with sport, professional athletes, intercollegiate athletes are role models, for better or for worse. And when it's worse, it can affect children and adolescents. Likewise, the cultivation theory holds that if we ingest large amounts of mass media programming, it may have an impact on our beliefs and our opinions. The example was given of people watching a large amount of violent programming, believing the world is more violent than it actually is. So, for example, on a news show, if you see every night that someone's house burned down, you start getting really paranoid or anxious that yours might burn down. Or with this story, if we are inundated with stories of the few professional athletes who are charged with sexual assault, we may begin to believe that all or most professional athletes are entitled sexual predators. So, from the longest period of time on one slide to the shortest, now let's look at the strategic sport communication model. This figure, which is 13.1 from page 276 of your text, provides an effective visual representation of the sport-specific communication model. We'll break down each component of this model next. Let's start with the personal and organization communication. I chose this picture of my friend Molly Carter, who you've seen before. She's formerly of Converse. She works for Gatorade now. She's communicating with NBA All-Star Dwayne Wade of the Miami Heat in working on an advertising campaign to show the overlap between the components. Here we see interpersonal communication between Molly and Dwayne, but also sport communication services and support, since Molly was a PR director for Converse and working on the Dwayne Wade Converse ad campaign. The components of the SSCM are not mutually exclusive. I'm not going to go into too much depth on personal and organizational communication, but I want to highlight and make sure that you understand the prefix intra, meaning within, and inter, meaning between. Right? So we most often think about it in terms of intramurals and interleague play. Finally, I love it that the text highlights the importance of being a strong writer and speaker, and also equates that to something that you know, which is sport. If you want to become good at sport, what do? You practice. NBA basketball player Allen Iverson famously quipped, "Practice, practice." Yes, Allen and sport management students, practice if you want to become a good writer and a good speaker. So there's really no equal in terms of enduring symbol of sport mass media than the set of ESPN Sports Center. And in highlighting this second component of the SSCM, I simply want to make sure you understand what mass media entails. There are three areas. First, print communication. For example, Sports Illustrated magazine, the daily sports pages in the newspaper, sports-related books, etc. Second, electronic and visual communication, which includes television, radio, film, and photography related to sports. It can also be referred to as broadcast communication. And then finally, new media, which of course incorporates the internet, including organizational websites, social media, smartphone applications, weblogs, etc. The third component is sport communication services and support. I chose this photograph from Pebble Beach Resort's golf course for a reason. Sport communication services includes advertising. When Pebble Beach advertises for golf or for a mega event like the U.S. Open that they've hosted recently, what images do you think are displayed prominently? Precisely, the picturesque, even iconic ones like this photograph. Within sport communication services and support is advertising, as mentioned, which is a part of sport marketing also. Then there's also public relations and crisis communication. Crisis communication is the processes put in place for intra-organizational and inter-organizational communication should a crisis hit. A crisis can be anything from a scandal involving a player or employee to a natural disaster to the unexpected death of someone in the organization. And processes are put in place controlling how messages related to crises are communicated within and outside the organization. I'm not going to focus on the models of public relations detailed in your text, but we will examine the careers in media and community relations. In talking about media and then community relations, it's important to again highlight the fact that in smaller sport organizations, these will likely be duties that are assigned to a person working in management. Whereas in large sport organizations, there is likely a media relations specific department. Mid-size agencies such as smaller intercollegiate athletics programs, maybe a media relations director with interns. So let's focus on what they are responsible for handling. Sport media relations or sport information professionals who work for a team, facility, or organization are responsible for creating, coordinating, and organizing information about that entity and disseminating it to the public indirectly through the mass media or through direct channels such as the organizational website, social media, etc. They write news or press releases, plan news conferences, and manage the press box. We'll focus on one of those aspects for the online activity or for the in-class activity of writing a press release. Sport community relations professionals who work for a team, facility, or organization are responsible for creating, organizing, and executing charitable initiatives and other programs designed to involve the sport entity in community enhancement. The mission for community relations is twofold. One, there is the corporate social responsibility aspect. Businesses have realized that sustainability involves giving back to their community, not simply taking in the form of profits, although that motive is clear also. The prevailing belief has started to shift to an understanding that business profit is only sustainable if the community is supported. For those Dr. Seuss fans out there, the model highlighted in his book, The Lorax, where the once-lurk takes and takes and takes and destroys the community and the environment and then goes out of business, is, and should never be a viable option. Many businesses and sport entities are no different and have realized that community development is paramount. Not only have sport entities realized this aspect, but players have as well. And one element of community relations in sport relates to player foundations. Professional athletes make millions of dollars, and this may come as a surprise to you, but many of them have their own foundations where they are working to combat social problems and really giving back. This subfield within sport is wide open and a very rewarding area in which to get involved. I've shown a couple of examples here, the Oakland Athletics Community Fund, the Junior Giants there on the right. As you know, I do research specifically with the Junior Giants and help to support the Giants Community Fund in that endeavor. Then you can see Think Cure, the official charity of the Dodgers, and then the Padres Foundation there. Alright, so that concludes this week's lecture. We'll be working on developing press releases in class on Monday. See you then.